right now at this table is Naval Stores. And what we mean by Naval Stores is really anything to do with shipbuilding. So specifically what we're talking about here is tar pitch and turpentine. We nicknamed this North Carolina's Forgotten Economy. Now some of the other folks in the crowd may have heard of turpentine before, heard that mentioned, or tar and pitch mentioned before, but a lot of people now, especially people from my generation, really don't know what it's used for, or what it was used for. So let's talk about tar and pitch. Now, the important thing to remember for both these processes is that these all come from pine trees. Really any type of evergreen tree will put off resin. Now at this time period, 1800s, the main type of tree they were using were longleaf pine trees. They figured out that of all the different varieties in North America, the longleaf really put out the most resin. So what is resin in a pine tree? Now, in a pine tree, if we kind of want to look over here, if we want to move over here, you have sap and you have resin. A lot of people get those two things confused or think they're the same thing, but they're actually two different. The sap is kind of on the outside of the wood and what we call the white wood. And that really carries the water from the roots up into the branches. But the resin itself lies in the heart of this tree. And it's really a natural defense system for the pine tree. So if you've ever been outside and you were cutting grass, or you hit the pine tree and tore some of the bark off of it, and it starts leaking that clear liquid out of it and covers that cut, or if a beetle digs into it, it kind of comes out and seals it off. And that's the resin. And it heals that spot. Again, it's a natural defense system. So this is what we're getting out of the tree to make tar pitch and turpentine. And we'll move back over here. So tar and pitch. We really don't know who really first started this process. As long as there's been boats in the ocean, we know there's been tar and pitch. We have a few different sources we can kind of guesstimate kind of how far back it goes. We know the Greeks talked about pitch in 400 BC. Pitch is mentioned in the Bible. When Noah's building the ark, God told him in the Bible to pitch it in without pitch. Now tar and pitch is coming from dead pine trees. So once this live pine tree dies, falls over, dies, whatever kills it, the outside wood, that white wood, will rot away. And what you have left is the heart of the pine tree. A lot of people may know it as fat lighter, lighter knot, light wood. A lot of people use this now to start campfires with, and they did too back in the day. That resin soaks back up into that heart, and nothing will eat in this. No termites, beetles. It's not really going to rot like regular wood. So by the time the colonists got here in the 1600s, there was dead pine trees that were 1,000+ year-old dead pine trees, and there was abundance of them here in the colonies. So how this process is to get the tar and the pitch, they would find a nice big flat area, that was kind of flat and open but at an angle. Excuse me. And they would dig out a big hole in the ground, usually anywhere from 30 to 40 feet in diameter, and they would line it with clay. From that pit, they would have a little trail, or almost like a trough coming away from it, where they would have a cutout place in the ground where you could put barrels. Then they would take these dead pine trees, they pull them out of the woods, and they would cut them up to about the size of a man's leg. They would stack this dead wood up in that big hole they dug out, and they would usually stack it anywhere from 20 to 30 feet high, depending on who was making it, how much you were making at one time, depending on how high that pile was going to be. Once they stacked the dead wood up, they would put in green wood, some fresh wood around it, and they would cover the whole thing in dirt except for the top. Now, what you basically made here is a kiln. Anybody who knows pottery, this is basically the same process almost. So they'd light a fire in the top and let it burn down. Now you're not wanting this to burn the wood, but sweat the wood. Because if this wood gets hard enough, if you've ever had a campfire of pine wood and you hear that sizzle, that's that resin burning up. They didn't want that. You wanted to sweat this wood. But they would let this burn for 9 days, day and night. All the men would come out from the town, and they would watch and make sure it won't get too hot or too cold. And usually about the second day, you're going to start seeing that resin, or what we call tar, drip out from the trough and down into the barrels. And that's what your tar is. And I'll pass this around usually, depending on the crowd and stuff, because the jar is usually a bit more sticky. Sometimes we pass around the smelling thing too. But I mean, I know most of you probably smell it, but I pass around anyway if anybody hadn't smelled it before. Tar, when it comes out the mound, is actually cool to the touch, and a lot of people don't believe that. I didn't believe it at first either, until the guy I worked with, he put his hand under it and caught some of his hand, or his hand. But when tar comes out the mound hot, it's almost like motor oil, but once it cools down, it's almost like molasses. Now, tar would be used on the rigs and the sails of the ships. All the ropes were coated in it, your hemp rope was coated in it. When they were caulking ships, you held up 4 fingers. What does that mean? God, that's not a lot of time. And so your tar was used on the sails and riggings of the ships. Now pitch, to get pitch, you would take the tar and they would boil the tar off. Lots of other states, lots of other colonies at the time, they would put them in big pots and light a fire on it, but North Carolinians did a little bit different way. They dug out another hole in the ground, lined it with clay, and they would dump the tar into the hole and just light the tar on fire. And they would let it burn until the fire went out pretty much. And what you get from that is pitch. Pitch, when it's hot, is almost like a paste, almost like a thick glue. But when it cools, it's like a rock. Now, ships will carry pitch with them on their travels wherever they're going in case they had to make a repair on the decks, because that's where the pitch was used. It was paved over on the sides and the decks of the ships. Now, it took a whole barrel of tar to get half a barrel of pitch. So you're taking basically 2 whole barrels of tar to get 1 barrel of pitch. A lot of them didn't like to do that, and they'd figure out ways to kind of cheat the crown on it and later the United States government. So let's go over and talk about turpentine really fast. The main difference I usually try to point on about these processes is that tar and pitch comes from the dead wood, and the turpentine comes from the living trees, the pine trees. So how you get the turpentine, instead of, again, we're working with live trees, they would take a boxing axe, which was just a long narrow axe, and they would cut a little box into the base of the tree. Once they did that, they would take a tool called a hack, which was just a short little handled instrument that had a curved blade and a 5 to 7 pound weight. They would come along and they would make a little, almost like a chevron or a V right above that box. And once you did that, that resin will start running out the tree and it would collect down into the box. And usually one cut would run about 3 to 4 days. They come back and make another cut. And they would go up as high as this tree as they could. And they would also usually have about 3 or 4 of these cat faces, as they called them, because if you see them from a distance, they look like the ears of a cat. Usually about 2 weeks, that box is going to fill up. They come around with a dipper, which is just a giant spoon, basically. They dip it into the box, get the resin out of it, or what they call virgin dip into a bucket. Once their buckets got full, they take it to a barrel that was in one of the roads in between the lines of pine trees. These 32, well, they're usually about 20-gallon barrels. Once they got full, they take them to the stills. Now, this is a turpentine still. You distill turpentine the same way you do alcohol. Same exact process. So they empty this virgin dip or the virgin gum into the stills and cook it off. And once you have left is turpentine. You can see the spirit of turpentine and on the top and the water on the bottom. Now, turpentine in this form is basically just an essential oil. At the time they used it, it didn't have a big use. I've heard some people say that if they didn't have tar, they would also paint turpentine onto the sails and riggings of the ships if they were low on tar. But besides that, it was really medicinal. Big medical, well, a big medicine at the time. If you were constipated, they had you drink turpentine. If you had diarrhea, you drank turpentine. If you had worms, you eat some turpentine on a sugar cube. If you had a cut, you put some turpentine on it. My grandmother, her dad said he swore by it. That's the only medicine he ever took when he was alive. And he lived to be 99, so maybe there was some truth to it. Now this system would change, the box system would change in the 1880s, 1890s, when they went to the clay pot system. So instead of making the box on the base of the tree, they figured out if you use a clay pot, you can move it up with that face, the higher you up you got, and you collect more product from the tree. and that's pretty much all I would say.